So I think I'd like to start off, though, Wang'ombe, by asking you what just are the key highlights or milestones in this journey. If you step back and just reflect and say, okay, this is the journey, what were the key milestones from your perspective and why?
Simon, thank you, and thank you for having me. I think from my speech, I indicated that we started from the deep seas, where we didn't have a vessel. So when you're in the deep seas and you can't swim, yeah, the first thing for some people is to pray, other people is to look for a raft to move out of the deep sea, but we thought it's important that we build a vessel. And our vessel here was the institution. And we didn't just need to build an institution. We were of the opinion that we needed to build a credible institution. And a credible institution, it's an institution with the capacity of the budget, an institution which is independent, and an institution which creates predictability, accountability, and transparency. And how do we do that? Is that, yes, Parliament had donated to us a law, but obviously is that to create more transparency, we needed to come up with the guidelines and the procedures on how we handle our work. And also is that when you build such an institution which is relating to the stakeholders, also you have to have guidelines within the CAK which bonds the team which comes on board. And therefore that's the first milestone we had to conduct, and that was by 2013. From there, yes, you've had an institution which has an organizational structure. What do? Bring in the crew. You start populating the organization with the necessary optimal number and the skills. But of course, is that Treasury was not there to give me a budget on a silver platter. And therefore, we decided to do it progressively. And therefore, we brought on board 25 staff members. And this is the number I call the critical number. And this number is where the rubber was meeting the road. And from now, the staff is that create a vision with these people. How do you create a vision? Come up with a strategic plan. And personally, I thought a 3-year strategic plan would have been important because of a lot of dynamism and uncertainties in the market then. But the board, we agreed with the board a 4-year plan. So we created a strategic plan, and the strategic plan was generally to build what I only sum it as building the muscles. That is building capacity so that now you can be able to enforce. After that is when we started with the enforcement. And enforcement, definitely, Simon, you don't start going to play in the EPL. And even if you are starting playing in the EPL, you start with the third division. And we started with the third division, the statutory requirement for mergers. And also we started creating awareness and advocacy. That was the year 2014. Then moving forward, we started now focusing on enforcement, which I can call hard enforcement, and that is cartels. So those, to me, were the key milestones we did that.
Thanks. I think that puts out many of the issues which we need to drill into if we're really going to understand the impact of the organization in practice. You know, it's easier to have an institution on paper, and you can indeed have warm bodies sitting in offices. I think the question that everybody will be asking is, so what impact did this have in each of the areas? In terms of your personal journey, what are the main things that you have brought in terms of your worldview, which informs that leadership style? And we are all different in this. Every leader is different. So you say there should be an ideal leader. I think that's wrong. I think everybody's got their own particular worldview. And where does yours come from?
I'm smiling because it's rare I talk about my personal life. And that's why I've separated my personal life with the authority. But since you have motivated me, Simon, I'm not a cool kid. I was brought up in the slopes of Mount Kenya, in a large family where the resources were scarce. In a family where my father was an elementary school teacher, and my mother was a small-scale farmer. However, all of us 7 are graduates, and none is in that farm. What does that mean? Is that my parents showed me is that you can achieve anything with any level of resources. And that is why all of us are graduates. Then number 2, what my parents taught me is that you need to prioritize. And what they prioritize, it's the education for the children. And even prioritizing in terms of the education for the children is that they could prioritize that they buy a school uniform, but they don't buy the shoes. And at personal level, that is what guided me. That the resources are never adequate, but you need to prioritize. Then the other issue is that what I learned from my father is that when I used to be in the secondary school, that I used to write to him and tell him that I need 300 Kenya shillings. If I don't break down it for what purpose, the gentleman never used to respond to me. But if at all I tell you I need 300 shillings for 1, 2, 3, 4, is that he used to send immediately without asking any question. And that is how I've been lobbying for resources. That you have to approach the person you're lobbying from with critical evidence. You want the resources. Now that is my personal life. Now moving to the career life, is that I realize that you have to be different from the others in terms of building your internal capacity. When I was a young officer, each and everybody flocked to the University of Nairobi or Makerere doing economic policy budget. I decided, let me push myself and do competition and economic regulation. I think also that time you were in Oxford. And that's when I went to London. I focused on this degree, and people were asking me, why are you focusing on this degree? And I said, the journey of becoming a DG 10 years before I became the DG. So I removed myself from the hard. And that is the tenet I brought to the authority. In terms of competition authority, what do you do? How do you separate the authority from the normal government image? And then the other thing I always learned is that never do anything which you cannot be proud talking about in this room. In terms of, if I take a bribe today, can I go and tell my children? No. But if at all I reject a merger or approve with conditions and I take a decision, I'll comfortably sit down with them and tell them that I did this and this today. That is what has driven me as the authority. Bring the world now to the competition regulation in Kenya. Simon, as you have indicated, is that you are a valuable player from the word go in terms of appreciating what is happening out in the outside world. And I appreciate what we learned also from the Competition Commission of South Africa, our big brother. Then also is that we engage a lot with the products from OECD and also International Competition Network. But let me put a caveat, is that whatever we engage with, we did not, to use your term, transplant and come and implanted it in Kenya. Is that we had to domesticate and also build our own cultures and institutions. That's how we perceive.
And I think it's very important, I think, to link these worldviews to the institutional evolution. And I'm saying this as somebody who was very fortunate to kind of land in the right place at the right time as well in the context of the South African institutions, and kind of saw it grow, because you're setting up something which is new. It's a new area in the country, typically in many developing or middle income countries, and it is hard. So you've got to do new things, and you are taking on big interests, and it is intellectually very challenging. And I think these are things that we don't talk about perhaps enough. Of course, it doesn't mean that everything goes smoothly, and I think those are some of the issues we want to get to. But just to reflect back on this, I mean, in my academic work was looking at reviewing how competition authorities in developing countries evolve. Literature, when the South African authority was young and the Kenyan authority was very young, by people who worked in the World Bank, also in Europe, the former head of the Portuguese authority, writing about this, said, you shouldn't do competition law in developing countries because the interests are just too strong. that the interests are too concentrated and they are too strong. So while the World Bank had been going around promoting competition laws everywhere and lots of countries had been writing competition laws, they said, well, it's great to have them on paper, but this is not a realistic agenda that's going to be you can pursue, because these vested interests are just too concentrated and too strong. Now, I think this is true of Kenya. And so I think Kenya is an interesting case study. But how do you reflect, in hindsight, on that argument that would have said, you know, it's a nice institution to have on paper, the letterhead is there, but you're not really going to be able to have the impact that these workshops and meetings say that you're going to have? What's your kind of counter-argument to that? And I suppose in the context of the kind of political realities and guiding institutions saying, these are the political realities, there's no point pretending that they're not there. These interests are there, and the role of an authority is to take on vested interests.
Simon, let me say I agree with Matteo, but I disagree with him that it's just a niche, the difficulties, it's just when you're forming a competition agency. Institutional development goes beyond the challenges you get from politicians. And I think, and you researchers, I challenge you to focus, is it the challenges you face from outside or its lack of leadership from inside? And now going back to giving my own perspective of what facilitated us in Kenya, it's the competition authority was the thought of creating a competition agency. We were lucky that we had a new regime. That is when the government of Mwai Kibaki was coming into power. And the government from the word go appreciated the need of having a strong competition agency. And under the economic recovery strategy, if you may wish to revisit that document, chapter 4, paragraph 6, was very clear what kind of an economic competition agency they wanted to have. So we rode on that opportunity. But if we did not take up the opportunity, and this is where the leadership came on board now, we could have just forgotten about that. How did we ride on that opportunity? Is that when Treasury was implementing the economic recovery strategy, is that it came up with performance contracts. And that time I was a junior, let me say I was a junior officer in the then Monopolies and Price Department. And therefore, when we went to develop the performance contract of the permanent secretary of the National Treasury, I realized that the development of the Competition Policy Agency was not part of the PSA's key performance indicator. And I became, what can I say, shrewd enough, and we ensured that it was put as one of the key performance indicator under his performance contract. And let me share with the people here, that is how the creation of the Competition Authority was very, very hastened. But it's not just about creating the authority. You have to identify the champions who can be able to support you in the journey of creating a credible organization. We were lucky, the gentleman who left being the head of public service yesterday was the PS National Treasury. We managed to interact, and we saw the idea of having this kind of independent organization fully funded. So we identified the champions. And the former president who left in the last government was also the deputy prime minister then. We identified them as a champion. So that's how we were able to create a strong competition agency. There were politics, we went to parliament in terms of how the law was being changed, but having a strong champions and identifying them, I think it's part of leadership rather than the headwinds you're finding. Is how you tackle the headwinds, because the headwinds will always be there. So leadership was very key. That's my submission.
Thanks. And I think I want to come back to some of the issues there about how you are innovative and you kind of you need to create your own luck as well. But that happens, I think, in the situations you face when you've got enforcement cases or issues, COVID, and let's come to that, and let's go into the the cases, because ultimately competition authorities do make their impact through cases.
Yeah.
And cases don't always, work out as you expect. But just before we go into looking at mergers and cartels, etc., in more detail, what do you think have been the highest profile cases, the cases that Kenyans are most aware of? I mean, we've already heard about food and fuel, and I'm tempted to ask about that. But what have been the highest profile cases that have created the credibility or created the profile of the authority in among the general population, business practitioners as well?
I think, to me, although it was not the first competition case we handled, but the case which really touched the core and the momentum at that time of the Kenyan economy was the unconscionable case regarding the sanitizers. During the COVID-19, the authority, we had intelligence reports, because we were sharing information with the Emergency Council on COVID-19, that people really wanted to increase the prices after the pronouncement of the first COVID case. And we formed an in-house team in regard to check on what will happen. And when the first case was announced, we issued a press statement in regard that we are aware that this is going to happen. And boom, at midnight, we receive information that one supermarket has increased the prices of sanitizer from around 300, I think it was, to around 600. And by the way, that really worried me, and that is the time I had sleepless night in CAK. Because as he said, is that when there's a price hike in CAK, people always look at CAK, and they don't appreciate the other issues, the other fundamentals which are affecting price. But this one was a CAK. And so we looked at our law. We had to interpret our law very, very purposely, expansively, and we placed this case under the unconscionable conduct under the consumer protection. And we were able to engage the party, and we told them to refund the people if they had sold the increased sanitizer. One thing I say that case was really fundamental at time is that it is signaled that the government is not sitting down during this time of COVID-19 and let you increase the prices. And I'm happy that the then president highlighted it and said that if you increase, the Competition Authority is on your case. That is a case which really helped us to manage the price volatility then. Then the other matter we have handled as the authority, it's in regard to the USSD prices. We did a market inquiry, and then we found that the platforms were charging 10 shillings for any transactions in regard to mobile money transfers. Why am I saying that it's an important case? Because later is that these USSDs are the ones which were being used during the COVID-19. And we managed to reduce the prices from 10 shillings to 1 shilling. That was quite effective. The other one, which I can say it was a high-profile case, it's the opening up of 86,000 mobile money agents to all the competitors. In terms of the impact, there was a complaint that Safaricom had exclusive agreements with all the agents, and we opened up. The question is, did the competitors take up the opportunity? That's a discussion for another day. But those are the cases I can highlight that, as I leave the scene, is that these are cases which impacted on the common citizen.
Thanks. And I think, from the COVID, for example, it relates to the discussion in the previous session, which is you've got an institution that can be flexible and responsive, and has tools to obtain information and analyze information and objectively look at what's going on. but it needs resources. So I'm pointing to the government here that if you undermine the institution, you will undermine the ability to be flexible and respond to these kinds of food price issues that we're seeing. But lest people think that we've colluded on this interview. Let me go to mergers and ask maybe questions which might be so not as comfortable, in the sense that competition authorities generally start with mergers. I think if you don't do mergers, it's difficult to call yourself a competition authority. Similarly with cartels. These are companies that should be competing, that merge, or that they collude. And I want to ask you, how many mergers have been blocked? And how do you think that reflects on the effectiveness of the regime?
Simon, none of the mergers has been blocked. And I wouldn't like you to create a perception that our work is to block mergers. I think we should go to the nitty-gritties of our analysis of mergers. And the discussion we should focus in regard to is our merger analysis effective? And the merger analysis has three outcomes. You approve without conditions, approve with conditions, or reject. Our analysis to date has not created a situation where we can reject a merger. You may ask me, maybe that is where you are heading next, is that has the merger regime been effective? I'll be honest to tell you, we need to do an ex-post review in regard to the decisions we have taken in all the sectors. And an ex-post review, you may ask me why we have not done it. You can see we started operating 7-8 years ago. And I think there's a skunk I will throw to my successor, that there's need of doing an ex-post review. We see whether in the markets where we have approved mergers, there has been some consideration. The other thing is that, there's a gentleman here who said that we need to be relooking at laws and see whether they are flexible. There should be a discussion whether our merger regime should be suspensory or should continue to be suspensory, or we should be looking at mergers after they have occurred, not forgetting our culture that after they join hands, what will happen in the future. But also is that I think also we need to look at merger not only in terms of the analysis, also in terms of the process of presenting mergers to the authority. We created an effective platform for mergers to be forwarded to the authority? Are our instruments, that is the mergers and acquisitions forms, effective in giving us all the information? And move forward also, Simon, to look at the progress and our interaction between regional authorities in terms of merger analysis and how they have affected the competition in the region, and how we can work better to ameliorate the challenges you highlighted in your presentation, in your earlier presentation. So there's a lot of dynamism, there are a lot of emerging issues, there are a lot of virgin and fertile grounds to be covered under the research, and that is something I'm opening to the researchers.
Well, obviously, as somebody who's a researcher, that's an answer I like. I think it's very important to do that. And I think I would like to kind of push you a bit further in terms of, if you're looking at the regime where it has come to, and looking at it as an evolution rather than, a simplistic how many mergers have been blocked or not, I guess the question would be, the follow-up question I'd like to push you on is, what needs to happen for the regime to improve in terms of the effectiveness of the analysis? Now, you've talked about it at a high level, but what would you set out as the main priorities on the work agenda from here, from the benefit of hindsight, obviously looking backwards over the cases you've looked at? And let me also just ask you to add on the regional dimension, because Kenya is not an island.
Yeah.
And if you look at the trade, etc., the challenges of an effective regional regime are hard. COMESA has done an amazing job. I think the EAC authority is there, but when you're looking at the next steps, what would you prioritize?
I think what you have indicated in terms of insight, mergers, they are really driven by research. And if I look back on one of my key performance indicators, I can say that I really wanted to achieve but have not been able to achieve, it's in terms of building research capacity, not only among our universities, where we can have this kind of research intercourse between the regulator and the universities, our supply institutions, but also building a very effective internal research unit. And I am of the opinion that with that kind of research, we can be able to deepen our merger analysis. The other issue is that also in terms of ex post review, is that it's not a secret anymore that we are facing some kind of budget constraints. Ex post reviews required to be done by independent organizations. There's somewhere we require more funding in terms of bringing on board people can check the decisions we undertook. I know there's a time we were trying to approach OECD in terms of peer review in some of our work, but the work we were not able to proceed because of other logistics. And there's an area where I feel that we need to look at, that is nationally. In terms of regional, sometimes I'm of the opinion there's a lot of ticking the boxes, on how we are handling regional mergers. How are we flexible at looking at different sectors, mergers in different sectors? How are we taking into getting capacity from other countries? And when I talk about capacity, I mean analytical skills to help us deal with those regional mergers. I know there are some mergers, and we have discussed informally in regard to the transport sector, which may be distorting the kind of movement of goods and goods in the region. These are some of the areas we really need to sit down and see whether we can expand in terms of how we analyze, how we collect information, and the decisions we take. And this can only be done if at all, among all the regional economic community members, we have competent national competition authorities. Right now, when you look at COMESA, is that it's very few authorities which are in existence. And that is what we are lacking. I think this need of building more competent competition agencies within COMESA so that they can facilitate that kind of decision making.
I think this is a very exciting area, in fact, to move forward, because you've got these institutions being put in place, and being able to build this now into COMESA is such an important agenda. I'm tempted to continue, but I want to move on because we've got a lot to cover and limited time. Let's talk about cartels. And again, let me set out kind of straw person, if you like, at the beginning. Say, well, in the context, as an economist, if you look at the Kenyan economy, and you kind of look at what characterizes the Kenyan economy, the size of the economy, the close-knit business groups, the levels of concentration, and an economist would say the probability of collusion and coordination is pretty high in an economy like Kenya, all else equal, if you just came in from outside. And that may be an unfair, starting point, but let me put that to be provocative. In that context, how do you weigh up the record of the CAK? And what are the challenges of this? Because this is one of the most difficult areas, I think, to do. So how do you weigh up that record self-critically? Successes, failures, lessons learned.
In terms of concentration, is that we could be concentrated, but that does not really move away from like for example in Korea and Japan, we have the keiretsus and the chaebos. They are really concentrated kind of farms. But the issue is that, have they been driven by cartels? No, it's historical. And taking into account that the Kenyan economy was just liberalized the other day, is that we can say that we have not been able to attract the kind of investments, and investment depends with a lot of investment climate, the level, the ease of investment. I'm not trying to focus on treasury, but we talked about the level, the ease of investment can attract people, can attract investments. But also the other challenge is that we might be having some kind of regulations within government which are blocking new entrants. And therefore, it will be very unfair to say that the concentration has been led by just lack of competition. So concentration may be led by many things, and that's why we focus also on advocacy. In terms of our cartel enforcement, you're telling me to blow my own trumpet, but let me put it this way. The time taken to investigate a cartel is 2 to 3 years. I think Antonio said that. Our existence in terms of cartel enforcement has been 4-5 years. And we have investigated and concluded 5 cartels cases during that time. So we've been taking 1 year to investigate a cartel case. Let me answer that question that way compared to the 2 to 3 years internationally. It's not me who said it. It's the OECD. So that's how I may put it. The challenges in regard to cartel enforcement, the incentivization mechanism we have vis-a-vis our law. There's the leniency program. Our leniency program is that has not been very effective because of our criminal provisions of our law. When somebody comes seeking for leniency and I give them leniency, have I insulated them from my friend ODPP coming for them? That is where we have been having some kind of gray area. I don't have capacity to insulate them. My friend may say that they cannot overlook their constitutional mandate. But one thing I've seen is that in terms of regulation, ODPP is that he has been indicating that they can cede some of their powers so that they can be dealt with administratively. So that is a positive direction we are seeing. And after we encountered that, is that we realized that also we can incentivize the Kenyans with another form which they may come forward. And that has been whistleblowing. That is people within the companies to come and tell us what has been happening. It's a very new incentive we have brought on board, and we hope that it's going to bear fruit. The other area in terms of how we have tended to approach cartels, obviously, is that we have not been sitting down and expecting that people will come whistleblowing or leniency, is that we have been conducting dome raids. And how we have succeeded, and the matter of paints, it was through dome raid. There's another matter which is on our desk now, the 6th cartel case, and it was through dome raid. And according to the information, the evidence my team has gathered, we might be heading to some other cartel settlement. But as we move forward, Simon, we need to ask ourselves, is that should we always go putting people in jail or shooting them? I think also the authority has approached cartel dealing through change of behavior. And this change of behavior, it's realizing the challenges we have been having. We were a controlled economy, price controls, And therefore, there are some people who are still suffering from what I may call those price control historical anachronisms, the trade associations. And that is why we thought that we can come up with special compliance program to be able to change their behavior rather than shooting people in the head or putting them in the jail. I believe, I'm a person who believes that change of behavior always works better than just shooting people in the head. I don't want to close factories because they have not paid, or rather, I know there are some institutions which have been closing because they have not paid taxes or something like that, but behavioral change is very key as a is very key in terms of regulation.
Thanks. I mean, I think, again, many different points in that. I think the fact that the authority has done raids is obviously very important. I think uncovering conduct that is there and has progressed cases, and I think in the short time, given the amount of time that it takes, these cartel cases would stand very well by international comparison. I think the leniency issue, I think, is something that's very much on the agenda for the next, because with this lack of certainty, I know from the work that I've done, if the leniency applicant does not know that they have certainty that if they fully cooperate, they will get leniency, then no lawyer is going to advise them to apply. It's just not going to happen. Yeah. And so, and leniency is so important for obviously for uncovering cartel conduct. So this, I think, is another work in progress thing that to put on the table. On the penalties, though, I want to come back because, colluding is a rational thing to do. As an economist, I would expect if there are 2 or 3 firms or 4 firms, the products are relatively homogeneous. If you are profit maximizing, you will want to collude. This seems to be axiomatic. Why would you, if you're profit maximizing, want to cut each other's throats to compete down to the bone? It doesn't make sense. If I was a shareholder, I would want to fire the manager that competes. I'd want to hire a manager who finds a way to collude. That's how you maximize profits. But then you have to have enforcement powers, and you have to have the backing of all the relevant stakeholders when you do the raids. But you have to penalize in terms of the penalties, because then it is not rational to collude, because the penalties may be so high that when you look at the cartel profits, you say, oh, yes, I can make cartel profits today, but I might get penalized. And your penalties have not been very high, I think it would be fair to say, relative to the cartel profits. And I'd like to push a bit more now. The behavior change, that's an evolutionary story again. Mm-hmm. Does that mean you're thinking that there should be higher penalties in future? Or are you saying that the penalties are appropriate and the behavior change has got a long way to go? Because I'm not sure what I'm hearing on the penalties. I know what my perspective is, but it's not my...
Lawyers, are you hearing? I think, let me put it this way. The penalty regime under our law reflects the international provisions. But in terms of the penalties we have implemented, just like in the international, other is that you have to consider, one, when I look at other agencies, they consider what we call recidivism, whether it's a repeat offender, and therefore the penalty increases as you repeat. Us is that what we have been considering is that we are trying to create awareness, and these people, maybe they didn't know that they have broken the law, and therefore that is why we started with that level of penalties. And there's a certain percentage which has been oscillating there. And it has not been, people have been baying for blood. But what, as the authority, is that we consider is that even when we ask ourselves, who was the first regulator to penalize a company in this economy to the tune of 5.5 million Kenya shillings? It was the Competition Authority of Kenya, something which was unheard of. And From there, we have seen regulators penalizing people, but not to that level. So the culture of penalizing people in your economy you have to put it on board. Then the other issue is that, what is the alternative? What if we go to the tribunal, to the High Court? Even that little you're penalizing, you might lose it on the way. There was one, we had penalized 7 million, then we continued, then we lost everything on the way because the complainant settled with the other party, and it had taken quite 3.5 years. Let me give you the example of the USSD. If we went through the advocatorial process and penalized the party, would we have benefited with the USSD rates during the COVID-19? So to answer your question, the penalties may be seemingly low, and I agree, as we move forward and we have created more awareness, is that we need to increase the percentage of the penalties we have been, the average penalty, to higher one, especially where there is recidivism, and especially where companies, they have lawyers who have been engaging with the authority, and it seems the lawyers have not been advising their clients.
I mean, I think that the legal practitioners obviously are a hugely important part of this ecosystem. Yeah. I think to move then to, again, resisting the temptation to kind of spend another 10 minutes on cartels, which we could easily, but to move instead to where I think maybe less attention is paid, and also I've highlighted it's quite an innovative area, and you've mentioned the special compliance program, which was run as an inquiry. Yeah. So I think the Kenyan experience, which you may not be aware how exceptional it is to use inquiries to obtain information to open up market issues. And I want to just highlight this has out, internationally. I mean, the Kenyan Authority was a co-winner of the Competition Advocacy Contest. This is an award by the World Bank and the International Competition Network every year. A co-winner with the UK Authority. I worked at the UK Authority for 1.5 years. The UK Authority has 1,300 people. A small merger team that I was leading the economics on, it had 25 people. I used to tell them, that's the whole size of the Kenyan Authority a few years ago. And so to win the award in advocacy is very notable. And in 2016 also an honorable mention on this. I think this is a really important area and I want to drill into. So there's been a number of inquiries and they are things that the CAK chose to engage in. This is part of strategy and being a pioneer. What were the main reasons, though, for grabbing hold of this tool? Because as I said, it stands out internationally, the extent to which you have used inquiries. What were the main reasons for choosing that tool and elevating it, if you like, I think, within the portfolio, or giving it a lot of weight?
Simon, when we started the organization, is that we profiled the issues which may be reducing competition in the economy. And one could be firms' behavior. Number two, it could be government's regulatory regime, which had created concentration. But also is that to appreciate these markets, is that we were of the opinion that we needed to do market inquiries, which, Simon, we have done 13. And I totally agree with Treasury. We prioritized the sectors which we wanted to focus on. And we wanted to make policy recommendations to the government, or even regulatory interventions, having appreciated the sectors. So the markets which were highly concentrated, which were highly regulated, the TUI sector, we did a market inquiry and we advised the government to open up some of the regulations which I had indicated for you to compete in planting, processing of specialty tea. You had to seek the permission of the KTDA, the incumbent and the dominant one. how the hell would you allow somebody to come and compete with you? So we engaged the Ministry of Agriculture, and they agreed to expand the provisions. And we saw 4 factories entering the processing of specialty tea, employing directly 240 people, increasing the producer prices compared to the traditional tea by about 600%, and that is what supported the common citizen. So one thing was to appreciate that. Then the other, where we have used the market inquiries, it's in the emerging economy. That is markets which are quite novel, which we are not understanding, so that we can be able to balance the new markets growth with competition regulation. And that is why we did inquiry for the USSD. And when we saw that there could be some enforcement measures we need to undertake, is we approached the parties and they agreed to reduce the rates from 10 shillings to 1 shilling. So the other one is that also we did an inquiry in regard to price transparency in mobile payments and mobile money transfers. When before is that you used to send money to somebody and you don't know how much you have spent, you had to go back to your wallet to check how much you have spent. And we told them that you have to come up with a price transparency telling you that you are going to incur this before you send the money. And based on that is that we created kind of price competition through transparency. Those are some of the market inquiries we have conducted.
And so some of these are actually using inquiries instead of, for example, an abuse of dominance investigation to a USSD situation. This kind of enforcement through inquiries, but less confrontational to get an outcome. But the other aspect would be inquiries which are focused at changing policy. And I guess the question I'd put to you here is, how effective have you been in that area? Because we have often, when authorities are sitting together and practitioners saying, well, we want to solve this problem, well, there's an issue, but influencing government is not always that easy. So how effective have you been in influencing government policies, you think, and what have been some of maybe the less successful inquiries out of that 13?
I think influencing government when you have the right champions, and influencing government. I don't know why people they take that government is constituted of people who don't have ears. Government, what the government requires is you present a position and you present evidence. And when you do a research and you show very clearly the advantages to the common citizen, the government will always listen. And if at all you realize that this research, you need to give it more impotence, why can't you now ride on African View, the African Competition Forum, and show that Tanzania has implemented this or Uganda has implemented this? These are the benefits, and these would be the benefits. So the approach is the key thing. Then also the people you are liaising with. If it's about digital platforms, why can't you do it with other agencies, the Central Bank of Kenya, the Communication Authority, and then they will see that this is not just an issue which is focusing just on competition, but it's cutting across the sectors. But sometimes that the government may not listen, may not appreciate, but also there are other ways of communicating to the government. You have dependable partners. Press is you can work with the press in terms of highlighting, a study you have conducted, and you talk to the press and they'll highlight. From there, the government usually gets really worried when they see something in the press, and they'll run and deal with that. Not that we have done that, but it's just an armory you keep in your, some weapon you keep in your armory for you to move along.
Well, given that you're saying it's a useful one, but you may not have done it, I actually wanted to ask you, because I think one of the most striking things for me is when I'm coming to Nairobi and looking at it, is how vibrant the debates are, in the press and on the radio about this. But also, there's a danger in a sense by sensationalizing things, because you raise expectations. There are legal processes here. It's not necessarily the case that, you say, oh, there's going to be cartels everywhere. Maybe not. Maybe there are other reasons for this. So, I wanted to push you a bit harder in terms of the importance of working with journalists, particularly with the press and the media, and the best channels through which to do this most effectively, particularly given the impressive scrutiny of the Kenyan press, which I think is a great asset.
One thing is that when you are looking for your distribution networks for your work, is that you profile the people you want to work with. The Kenyan press has been good we have been using the Kenyan press to take the right message. It's unfortunate some people in the places of power, they use the press to take the right image. But the authority is that we have taken a deliberate move that we are pushing the message. It's not the image of the authority or Wang'ombe Kariuki as a person. And to ensure that they are putting the right message from the word go, we needed to train them or to create awareness in regard to the nitty-gritties of the competition law and to manage those high expectations. I know some people who are in the press, they are already working with the authority. Our current communications manager was somebody working with the Business Daily. He managed to pass that handle. But when you train the press, when you engage with them, they'll be able to pass the right message. Working with the lawyers, we have been interacting with the lawyers. They have been quite dependable in regard to giving us feedback. I'll be very honest with you, is that each and every quarter I meet with about 3-4 lawyers for breakfast or for lunch, not for any other purpose, is to interrogate them in regard to how do you find our services, which areas in terms of the instruments can we improve or can we engage with you, and also is that we engage them every year in such a symposium. It might seem that we are just doing it for the gallery, but also to us it's a form of rational and, to be crude, a selfish way, because we are training the lawyers, and then from there they'll go and train their corporates, or there will not be a lot of back and forth for the institution, and that has really helped. The other area is that I would like to share with the stakeholders. We have already agreed with the Kenya School of Law that we'll be offering pupillage to legal students, to law students, and already is that we've had one pupil on board, and we are encouraging people to come on board as a way of building, young lawyers to be able to take this to the next level. It's not just about working with the press, but also is that from next year we are going to have with the Kenya Institute of Curriculum Development, is that we have already agreed and come up with areas that they are going to put into the education system in terms of consumer protection and competition law. That's how we have been working with these stakeholders.
Thanks very much. Given the time, I want to jump now to consumer protection, and I want to ask you first of all about. They're both combined, obviously, in the institution. But the question I think that I have is to what extent these tools in the toolbox, the competition, the consumer protection tools, work together, or are they quite separate tools? And if you can give kind of concrete examples, and I'm not saying there's not a right answer, it's just a question about, are these tools that should be combined and seen as two hands on the same body, if you like, or are these distinct areas and you think that they should, maybe be in one institution but not necessarily operating as complementary mechanisms for addressing market issues?
From my experience is that competition ensures that the goods and services produced by the market players are produced competitively through the competition process, through innovation. And then consumer protection ensures that the products of competition process is that they meet the criteria, that is the minimum standards. Number two is that the people who are advertising for these products is that they are not misleading advertisement and there's no misrepresentation. And therefore, you can see there's that relationship. This one produces, the other one takes to the producers takes to the market, and the consumer protection ensures that whatever is on the supermarket, it's meeting the, let me put it, the health standards or what is reflected there. Taking into account the budgetary challenges we are having in this country, I am of the opinion that, and it has worked, that we can have this under one roof. And also, as the markets are changing, and Simon will bear me witness, is that you'll find that competition in the digital platforms and digital economy, you realize that there's a lot of consumer protection angle as also competition angle. And therefore, this calls for more enforcement harmonization between these disciplines. I know also there's also the need to not only look at anti-competitive practices, there's a deliberate move also to expand to areas of buyer provisions to look at fair practices. I know some people, and one friend of mine is not very comfortable with that, Kwame, in terms of expanding towards that kind of area. But from where I stand is that I feel they can really work together. And soon or very soon, you might see also the combination in terms of data protection and competition under one roof. I'm seeing, maybe after I leave here, I need to research more and see how we can collapse all these into one in Kenya.
I mean, I think some people have said that we have analog regulators in a digital age. You know, we set up an energy regulator because it's energy. We set up a telecoms regulator, payments over here, competition here. This is based on the kind of former state-owned enterprises and where they were privatized. And we're in a world where it's about data, consumer decision-making. We're all channeled. We don't even realize we're being channeled in terms of our decision-making. And I think it's a very interesting area. I'd put up my hand and say that I always thought consumer protection was different and separate, and now I think, I can see that this is not the case, partly from the cases that have been picked up here. I mean, and there are an impressive number of consumer protection issues. I think that I just want to recognize. In terms of the buyer power, though, and this is, I think you mentioned Kwame's views on this, or at least alluded to, I'm guessing what they are. This also seems quite fundamental, because you're moving from looking at efficiency to fairness. And where do you draw from internationally in that move? I mean, why do you believe that? On what basis do you believe that this move? I mean, now when legislation comes in, you don't have a choice, right? So now you're leaving. Maybe you can reflect on being given this mandate in terms of fairness, and how wide do you think this should go, or is this relatively narrow in certain sectors, such as in supermarkets not paying on time, in which case it's relatively ring-fenced?
We talked about concentration in the economy. And as you can remember, I talked about the chaibos and karaitus in Asia. And in Kenya, is that we have some farms operating at this level, and then we have other SMEs operating at this level. And we need to create sustainability, because these SMEs, they are providing a certain, they are serving a certain clientele in the market. And therefore, they support competition to some extent in the market. And therefore, the basics and the tenets of the traditional competition law was not able to attend to this. Then also, Simon, when we look back, is that when you are attending to SMEs' needs, especially the suppliers, is that you are dealing with a supply chain problem. Because let's look back. Uchumi failed in this country. Nakumat collapsed. And with this kind of collapse, they they took off with the SMEs money. But when this law came on board, at least CAK was able to salvage 2.9 billion shillings for the SMEs. We have been able to support motor vehicle assessors within the insurance industry, especially during the COVID, and we saved about 2,000 jobs and ensured that they were paid about 40 million. And we ensured that those people remained in the market and they competed. If at all we were not on board, some SMEs would have collapsed and they leave only some major ones, some bigger SMEs. Will it have created competition? So when you look at it expansively, is that you can see that it has got some competition parameter, but it's not within the traditional competition tenets. But what I would like to say is that any competition law developed for a country, it should serve the purposes and the needs of that country. Is that we should not be able to transplant or to say that this is the best law.
I think this is a debate which is just beginning.
Yeah.
I'm going to do an omnibus question to wrap up. And to come back to say, okay, here's the impacts and outcomes in these different areas we've skimmed over, but ultimately bring it back to the strategic planning process and the building of a credible institution, including through the time of COVID. You've placed a lot of importance on substantial importance on your multi-year strategic plans, I want you to kind of reflect back and say, well, okay, so we did these plans, but part of it, I think, is also reflecting on the things which didn't work. We learn a lot from things which didn't necessarily succeed, as well as the things that did. What do you think are the main lessons, the gains that you've taken out of the planning process for the CAK, which you might take to other institutions, both in terms of the successes and the failures and the process that you went through as an institution in looking at those plans and reviewing those plans? And then I'll have one last question just in terms of the way forward. But,
Okay, well, one thing in terms of the plan is that the best thing is that you have created the vision for each and everybody in the organization. It goes beyond Wang'ombe, Kariuki. And anybody joining the CAK, when they are given that strategic plan, is that they'll be able to know where we are focusing on as the agency. However, is that in the last 4 years, the plan implementation of the plan became somehow challenged in terms of that the government, because our strategic plans are pegged on the national government's agenda. There was no clear focus whether we are dealing with the medium term, whether we are dealing with, is it called Big Four agenda or Big Four plan? And therefore there was a lot of haziness. And therefore when there is a lot of haziness from the government side, is that now it becomes very, very difficult to implement what you have said. The other challenge we had is that we wanted, like for example, to procure some forensic equipment to be focusing on some areas. Now, I will not be very clear on those areas. And taking into account, borrowing from my speech, I said the budgets have been stagnant, and obviously they have been starved in terms of development agenda. And you realize that now we might not be able to procure those forensic analysis equipment, and hence at the end of the day, we might not achieve what we had set in the strategic plan. But that does not mean that we have not attained, the strategic plans have not helped us. Obviously, they helped us on how to tackle the COVID-19. Is that as the authority, we had anticipated a crisis which can make us not work from the office. And that time is that we had thought maybe a terrorist attack or something like that. And hence we started investing in automating our processes. And boom, COVID-19 was here. We just moved seamlessly. But that does not say that because we are having these challenges, is that we cannot innovate. We have to innovate if at all we are having the challenge of the budget. I'm looking at the rentals I pay for my office space, and I'm challenging my people. Why should we pay 100% and we have automated? Why can some of us work remotely and then we save 50% of the rental fees? So we are going to see a lot of innovation so that we can be able to attain our strategic plans.
But I think I'd like to ask just, what do you think are going to be the greatest challenges? What do you think in hindsight you might have tried to do more, but are still on the to-do list that you're passing over? And it's a huge agenda, but also in terms of the challenges of competition in the context of regional integration. We have all of these huge challenges. What would be your final insights, going forwards for whoever takes over the ship, as well as for all of the crew that are on the ship, as well? I like the analogy. As you are leaving them and waving goodbye and saying, guys, good luck.
I think they should pay me the 13th salary. But on a serious note, is that Simon, the Kenyan economy has been divided into 47 economies. That is the regional governments. And we have seen some challenges in terms of the promulgations of regulations within these governments, where they have disintegrated Kenya into 47 economies. And I really pity that person who goes to sell Kenya as an investment destination, because Nairobi and Kajiado, in terms of the ease of doing business, may be totally different. They have been promulgating regulations which are affecting competition nationally. And therefore, we developed a tool to guide them in terms of implementation of promulgating those regulations, but we have not had a chance of enforcing that tool. And I'm seeing some opportunities now working with the Treasury in terms of, borrowing the Australian version, where they can have a fund, and any regional government which encourages competition through expunging some of the restrictions in competition can draw from that fund. And we cannot be competitive outside there if at all we have not created seamless competition nationally. That is an area where I see that the opportunity. The other area which I can say we scored about 20-30%, it's bringing competition in the professional services. When you look at building of a home in Kenya, is that you realize that the professional services are taking about 20% in terms of the cost. And this is just because some people want to maintain their lifestyle by fixing minimum rates for the services they are offering. I've seen some progress in terms of the accountants. Parliament rejected their minimum rates. My friends, lawyers here, they have really pushed for that. And that is an area, as the authority, I feel that we need to push further. The other area is that, as I have indicated, it's in terms of research, is that from the onset, we wanted to build research capacity with our institutions. Sometimes I'm ashamed that, Simon, here you are from South Africa, from Scotland. For national strategy, I'll be more appreciative. After 10 years, it's somebody else from Kenya who is putting me to task. But we have not been able to build this capacity or to entice and to motivate the universities. Then also is that internally, there's still room to build a research capacity, and that is something I'll put to my successor. Those are the three key issues I'll think about. Then moving towards the regional. Personally, I feel there has been some haphazard way of setting regional economic communities competition agencies. There are no mechanisms of talking to each other, and therefore it creates a bit of unpredictability to the business community. That is not what we want as regulators. We need COMESA to be interfacing with the East African community, or to even cede some of its powers to East African community, and the same with the East African community. We need to have that mechanism. I'm happy and I feel that community agency, it's working with COMESA to see that they create a kind of synergy. Also in terms of movement from as the basics of regulating mergers to the basics of regulating and controlling the most egregious form of competition infringements, and that is cartel. We are yet to move to that level, and I feel my successor should really push for that. The other area is that I'm anticipating for my successors to do. We have gotten a space in the international community. We are sitting on that table under the ICN. We have been able to drive the agenda. Even now we are discussing about public interest. We discussed about poverty. You remember in the earlier ICN meetings, you couldn't discuss competition policy and development. I still hope that my successor will still continue maintain that visibility internationally.
Thanks. Thank you very much. I think it just remains for me to say two things really. One is that I think the record, as far as I perceive it, is actually a challenge to all of us. So it's a challenge to us in the research environment that we need to work together more across the continent. So I don't take it as, in a sense, the negative, say, where you're maybe putting it on terms of the research capacity, but more a challenge to all of us in the universities to work together. I need to engage now with my colleagues in universities here, and actually something that we need to do more of. So I would take that on actually as something that is a criticism of or a push to us. And lastly, just to recognize what an honor it has been to be able to do this, and to recognize the commitment. I know the long hours that you have put in. Sometimes I will be sitting here late at night and he's not gone yet. Why is he not left the office? I'm sure all the staff know this. The sacrifices your family has made as a result, and I think as the one who's doing the interview, I want to recognize all of that side as well, because I think it's a material and important aspect of the commitment as well. So thank you very much, and it's been a great honor.
Thank you. Thank you so much.